For our next panel, I would like to call our own unicorn, Moderator Orlie Dahan, Executive Director at EcoMotion at the Israeli Innovation Institute. Joining Orlie on stage, Ofer, CEO at Argus, Oren, Keilaf, CEO at Innoviz, and Nir Erez, CEO at Moovit. Panel Born to be a Unicorn.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this day so far. It's been a big playa here with a lot of activities. I think one thing we understood, Israel is becoming a global hub for innovation in transportation and mobility. This is clear. And this is why I invited these three amazing guys here, because I think they represent this. I think they represent exactly what is happening and exactly everything that we're seeing today and where we're heading. I'm going to start with Ofer, because Ofer, I wanted to ask you, and this was something that I'm always thinking about, as someone who was born to be a unicorn, have you thought of this merging with the Tier 1, working with OEMs? This was the plan from the get-go. You started with a small team of Zells at IDC a couple of years ago, not that long, and I wanted to know if this is something that was always the goal from the beginning.
So first, really happy to be here. Exciting to see all of this ecosystem. I think growing year over year. Yes. Amazing. When we began, I think the vision was pretty much as it is today, to be installed pretty much in most of the new vehicles by 2023. And what we have told ourselves from the get-go, every single decision that we are taking along the way should lead us one step further or one step closer to getting to that vision. And that remains the vision. So certainly no, we didn't know that we are going to be bought by Tier 1. By the way, we are not really merged, so the way that we are operating is completely independent. So we are independent subsidiary of Electrobit, which is the software group that is independent from Continental. Still, 80% of our sales are to Conti competitors. So the fact that we've decided to take the offer is in terms of how can we speed up, both in budget, both in having better, let's say, backing. So if we need another 100 integration engineers from Electrobit, we have it. And this is something that as a startup you don't have that strength. And the fact that we are independent allows us to go a lot further. So to your question, no, we didn't imagine that will happen, but it wasn't also the goal. It's only kind of a milestone in order to achieve the real goal.
Omer, this is totally your goal. How do you do this? How do you crack this startup Tier 1 OEM triangle, and exactly with all this competitiveness and all this German-American, very complex industry structures?
Yeah, so Innoviz is developing a LiDAR, so when there are at least 5 or 50 or so companies in the world that are trying to do this, so it's obvious that you need to be able to find a way to step up out of the noise. And the way that we've approached this is by we started to talk with OEMs, and like for example BMW, we met with BMW in like September 16.
Big announcement with the BMW.
Yeah, recently the nomination with BMW. I'm just like going back in time, like to go over like how things happen. So we've met with BMW. We told them about us meeting a certain, like to be able to show a demo by the end of the year. And like when we met that timeline, and they showed that they saw that we are, are on time and like showing a really good progress. They told us to bring a Tier 1 to the table, and that was a good position for us to come with to a Tier 1 like Magna, and helping us to get that collaboration. I mean, in order to get started to work with Tier 1s, you need to give them some, sense of business that you can bring them. And that led to a partnership with Magna, and starting to work with BMW on this beginning of 17, and that led to BMW kind of they liked what we do, and in a way that helped us to get more partnerships in the industry. And now the nomination is now a big endorsement for us in the industry. That it's the first time that an OEM is choosing the solid-state LiDAR for mass production. So that's another foot in the door in the industry. So you need to find a way that to collaborate with different tier ones. That you should not give should not tie yourself too hard to a certain tier one, because you need to be able to expose yourself to different OEMs through different tier ones. But you need to give them the sense that they will have certain minimum of business. So there are ways to do that.
I love that. An OEM asking a 2-year-old startup.
Yeah, we were 8 months old.
Yeah, go get me a tier one and let's do business. This is amazing. Nir, your global major market is a bit different. You're not working with OEMs and tier ones. You're working more with service providers like Uber. Yeah, if Google Map can be your type of competitor, how do you deal with this, your own triangle in more mobility services world?
I think we're representing a completely different world than my friends here. And our world is not related to one OEM that likes what we're doing. We are being judged every day by hundreds of millions of consumers. So Moovit is a consumer app on one end. And on the other hand, it means that we need to compete with other companies who provide solutions to consumers. So our world or our reward is coming directly back from the users. On the aspect of competition, in our case, our main competitor is Google Maps, of course, and it's quite difficult to convince, investors very early days to invest in a company that's supposed to compete with Google Maps. But since we've seen many situations where consumer startups were able to not only compete but to disrupt a lot of the traditional players, I think it becomes more realistic to believe that that can happen. So our ecosystem is actually not one-to-one, like my friends here, is like one company to many, many consumers or to many service providers, which is, again, multiple companies that we're dealing with.
So speaking of investments, Intel, which bought Mobileye, just led your last round, bringing you to $133 million. Congrats, in total. Are these two connected? Mobility services, how do you see Moovit integrate in this future?
So it was definitely connected. I think that I don't want to speak on behalf of Intel. I'm not in the title of doing so. But whoever listened to BK, the CEO of Intel, in the last year or so, he was actually set the phrase of data is the new oil. And when Intel started to think about data, especially on the mobility world, data is divided into two main aspects: data that comes from vehicles and data that comes from people who are actually moving or using transportation or any modes of transportation to move within the cities. When you think about what Mobileye is doing and what Moovit is doing, you see a lot of complementary aspects of data collection. We collect today about 4 billion data points from our users who are actually moving in more than 2,000 cities, while Mobileye gets most of its data from vehicles. If you combine these two types of data sets, you actually get a very clear insights about how cities are actually supporting or providing movement to the people who lives in the city. And I think that was part of the reason why they decided to invest.
Yeah, data is the new thing. This is why also Autonomo is doing so great. Omer, in the last 2 years, you're getting close almost to what they raised in 7 years, what Moovit raised. What do you feel is the shift? Do you feel that you're just lucky, a lucky unicorn to be, or there's something different in this era now?
I don't mind to be lucky.
It's important.
Luck is good. I think our last round was mostly strategic, and it was coming from partners that we have in the industry that see their success as our success, and that was helping us to get the relevant funding that we had. I think we did have I don't know if it's luck, but we started early enough so we could actually access the core teams of the OEMs and the tier ones, because we were in a very early stage, quite mature. In 8 months we already showed something working, and that got them very
Israeli style.
Yeah, Mossad style. So we managed to get to the core teams and starting working with them early on. I think today it will be harder because at the beginning everybody was trying to figure out I would need to explain what is a LiDAR to some companies. Today it's not the case. Today they are super busy, there's a lot of noise, and most of the companies are building kind of like a second tier to kind of screen out the local new startups. So we had the ability to run fast and to meet the decision makers, and having that we've really had fast process and progress, it was like a snowball effect. So
what's the noise you're talking about?
I mean, there are many companies, and there are more, everybody calls it like a slideware. It's like companies with slides instead of hardware. So, and it's hard for them. I mean, you can imagine that these teams hear a lot of suggestions, a lot of ideas, and they need to focus. And it's hard for the core team, the developers, to meet those innovations. So today, they introduce a second level of screening teams that are scouters or people that are now, like in Israel, there are many of those. And we were early enough while they still had attention, and find a way to work with the teams, and keeping the momentum and meeting the timelines were helping us to only strengthen it. So I think today it might be a bit harder, and maybe it's a challenge to find a way. But I think in Israel today there are many companies that already have business like us, and I think it helps also to OEMs and tier ones to make a decision to work with additional startups in Israel, because they already have ground, people and people on ground, and it's in a way it's also German companies learn that to work with Israel it's actually very easy, because we're only 1 hour difference, and to work with Silicon Valley is hard, and for sure in Asia. So we have that actually benefit, and or you have Mobileye in Israel, and they bring a lot of experience for people from outside of Israel that know how to work with crazy Israelis. So it's helpful.
Speaking of crazy Israelis, how many employees you grew in the past year in Argus?
The acquisition time, which was November, we were about 60 people.
Yeah.
Now we are 100 people.
Yeah.
By end of this year, we're going to be 160 people. And that's pretty much one of the reasons why for us that acquisition made sense. So kind of to take the early vision of Oren and myself coming from 8200, Zohar Zisapel, our chairman, and bringing that into our realization. And I think that's for us kind of to see how the vision that we had end of 2013, we're getting faster, a lot faster.
And where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? Where is the company? Where is the product? What are you doing?
That's easy. Today we are market leader mostly in technology. I would say first implementations, first integrations, 5 years from today, installed in most of the new vehicles installed globally. And I think pretty much that's what excites us every day. How do we make that revolution of connected cars, of even autonomous cars, really a reality in terms of that revolution will be enabled with a little bit less vehicles hacked, or I would even go to the extreme flying off the roads. And only today there was, yesterday there was the announcement of new vulnerabilities in BMW. Last week, VW and Audi. Without cybersecurity, I think it's going to be quite challenging for all of us.
Okay. Nir, this is not your first rodeo. You've come from many different industries. What do you find most fascinating about mobility?
So I have to be very honest. I mean, when I started Moovit 6 years ago, it was all about really leaving a mark on the world of public transit. And it's like actually going to the sea with your surfboard, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a 15-meter waves. I think that without me planning that, the whole world of urban mobility became a huge maverick or a huge wave that represent today the combination of urbanization, unbearable traffic, not enough public transit, and the new innovation in autonomous vehicle. All these aspects together, I think, made mobility the new revolution. If you look at the internet revolution, then the mobile phone revolution, that's the next thing. So I think the exciting thing we see is just the tip of the iceberg regarding what is about to happen in the next 5 to 15 years. The whole paradigm change in vehicles and the ability to track both vehicles and people make this possible, and we'll see great changes in this area.
What would be your next startup?
I don't know. I still want to be in Moovit for the next 10, 15 years just to see this happen.
Okay, we have a little bit of time. I want to give something back. There's people watching us now. In a few weeks, there's going to be people watching us globally. Startups that are beginning, what tip can you give them as a unicorn to be? What can they do or focus on or, enhance in order to get there faster?
You want me to start?
Go for it.
So for me, Moovit is my third startup, and all three of them end up in a good way, different size of exits. But what I've learned is when you start your company, there's two very important things. One is be very focused about your vision and what do you want to achieve. And the other one is select very carefully your partners or investors. I can't explain how sometimes people underestimate choosing the wrong partners, the wrong investors to the company. My tip to new entrepreneurs who start their company is to think very carefully about who they're taking money from and why, and to understand that this is even more difficult than marriage. It's not fun, but you can divorce your wife, but you can never divorce your investors. So think very carefully about who you're getting into business with.
I was part of 3 startups before I started my own, and my lesson learned from those startups was the first one I learned that the importance of the strength of the team and the culture. In the second startup, we developed a very unique technology, but in a way we were also dependent on another technology that we didn't develop, and the founder of that company believed that by the time that we will solve the problem, they will solve the problem, and it didn't happen. And on the third startups, we developed a very unique technology, but we had also to invent a market, and that was hard. So in this startup, it was very important for me, first, obviously, to build the right team. That's obvious. The second was that we decided that we spend a lot of time to make sure that we choose a path where we take all the technical risk on ourselves, because we know how to solve challenging technologies, and we didn't want to have a situation that we need to rely on someone else, and that's why we developed most of the components of the system, from the detector level to the MEMS, to the ASIC, to the signal processing, the hardware, and like the computer vision. We do everything because we know that our ability to solve hard problems, and we want to have, like, if we succeed, we win. And obviously, we chose a path where, if we solve the real problem, like the LiDAR has so much requirements, and we didn't want to find ourselves in solving part of it. We decided that we'll only move forward if we make sure that we have a design that we know that we will solve everything. So we don't need to convince people that, you don't need long range, or you don't need like high frame rate, or you don't need like we didn't want to convince the market what it needs. We just spent 5 months before we started execution just sitting around the table to learn what the market needs, look at the different ways to solve it, and only once we've realized that we have the right solution, we actually started to execute it, because time is the most expensive thing you have, and if you started doing something and you learn too late that it's not good enough, you might have built the wrong team, and you need to now do everything all together, you might miss the market. So patience, and in starting your, what you're doing, make sure that you take the risk on yourself and not on someone else, and try to enjoy.
I see it also in some startups, also like Halo Technologies. They started by putting together an awesome team and just to start from there, bright minds that can carry out and do their own thing, and then to start with together on what should be the product.
We spent 5 months in sitting around the table, just on the board, brainstorming on 5 different ways to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And only when we were very sure that this is the right solution, we started moving, and we moved fast. So
amazing. Ofer?
And I think that was in both of the stories. So selecting the partners, you refer to investors. I would like to refer to the co-founders and mostly to the employees. Each and every single one of our employees, could they run with us for 10 years? Would they be people that will enjoy working with every single day, every single morning? Are these the people that will think about the company in the evening? And until today, even that we are scaling up significantly, recruiting about 10 people per month, each and single one of the employees that are joining us are the best. We are not even compromising a bit. And I think that's for me choosing your partners in the best way in Israel, and also the people in the US or in Japan that you are recruiting. And the second point is engage your partners externally very, very soon. If that's our customers, the OEMs, the tier 1s, the tier 2s, right? We're working with Infineon, with ST, with Renesas, with Singtel, with Ericsson. We touched the industry really, really, really early on, and that pushed us so much faster and saved so much time. So I would say both.
Yeah, the tier 2s are actually very interesting. Beginning startup, they go immediately to tier 1s and OEMs, and there's a whole world of tier 2s out there, which are the fundamentals of the whole process. So I completely agree.
And by the way, the tier 2s are eager to reinvent themselves usually, because they want to go up in the ecosystem. They're usually amazing people, super talents, and they are one of our best partners, really.
I think you guys said something right. You see the people who you work with more than your family, your friends, your partners. And one last question for me, actually. How do you do it work-life balance? A tip for the entrepreneur. Is there a work-life balance? Should you keep it? Will you burn out? I can tell you that next week I'm burnt out after this day. But how something that you practice, that you do, that you can give on?
So, as the oldest guy here in the panel, and since I'm in this business for more than, just the startup business, for more than 20 years in 3 startups, I can tell you how am I doing it, besides the fact that I married a wonderful woman that's still with me. Maybe she can suffer. But seriously, there's no way to cut your working hours or not do things, because as a startup, you have to do what you have to do. My philosophy is that startup, people think it's a fast ride. Maybe for these 2 guys it was quite fast ride, but usually it's a long ride. So you have to prepare it like a marathon. And what you don't do in marathon, you don't start all out and expect it to continue for 42 kilometers. So you have to understand and tell yourself all the time, it is a long run. You have to keep your reserves in place. So personally, I mean, find yourself something else that you like to do that keeps you balanced. I do a lot of sport in very early hours of the day or very late hours of the day. I do it mostly alone. It keeps me feels better, but it also gives me some time to think about the day, about the next day. Most of my best presentations happen during long runs, so that's my daily routine.
I think the only way to solve this, and I'm not the right guy to give tips on work-life balance, sorry, but I think the only way to solve this is to trust your team. If you trust your people, like the team leaders, then your life becomes much easier. If you don't trust them, your life is horrible. That's all.
Question is if you trust anyone at all. Yeah.
I think that, at least for me, the work-life balance is always mixed, because even when I'm home, I'm always thinking about work. Even I'm at work, I'm trying sometimes to think
You
also
closed the
about
deal with
life.
Continental while you were giving birth.
Yeah. So for me, that's my first daughter was born 2 days before the closing. So at birth room, we were collecting the signatures. So it was quite an interesting week, let's say. But I think that at the end of the day, the balance should be, are you happy? Are you happy with what you have at home? Are you happy with what you have at work? If you are happy, then you have the perfect balance. If you are not happy, then you need to think of a change. I'm happy.
You guys made me super happy. Thank you for this time, and let's do amazing things together on forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.